What's crack-a-lackin', my fellow home dogs? It's time for a visit from Dr. Pup, and today I've got you a complete prescription of Spidey goodness. As today we'll be looking through all of the extended and alternate cuts of the Spider-Man movies. Now, this will be just alternate and extended cuts as movies. This will not just be a breakdown of deleted scenes. So, sit back, relax, subscribe, 'cause it's pizza time. Spider-Man 2 is a perfect film. It's one of those films where there's not a single thing that I would change. So, let's see what they changed with Spider-Man 2.1. Spider-Man 2.1 released straight to DVD shortly before the theatrical release of Spider-Man 3. The film boasts an extra 8 minutes on top of its original runtime. So what were those 8 minutes filled with? Well, we've got 2 additional scenes, and very short ones at that, one of which being the middle of the film where Mary Jane is quizzed by her best friend as to whether or not John Jameson is really the man she wants to marry, and Mary Jane really just hints at her uncertainty. The other after Spider-Man has quit and J. Jonah Jameson uses his costume to play in. The scene with Mary Jane and her friend is nothing exciting, and tells us nothing that you wouldn't already know just watching the standard theatrical cut, as Mary Jane's uncertainty about John Jameson is already made pretty clear with her attempts at replicating the upside-down kiss from Spider-Man 1, and her subtle body language really just explains it all. This new scene kind of spells it out for you, and it makes the film's pacing just that little less slick. It's nothing egregious, it's nothing you'd really point out and be like, whoa, the pacing's broken or anything, but it's like, the pacing of Spider-Man 2 is so good. With a scene in there that tells us stuff we already know, it's not quite as perfect as it was before, but I don't think anyone would have complained if it were left in the original cut. Then we have the scene with J. Jonah Jameson, and it's extremely goofy, and it's that Sam Raimi Spidey goofy goodness. It feels more like the kind of thing that should be a DVD extra, as it goes very, very cartoony. I think it was to serve as kind of a comic relief at a very sort of intense time of the film. Spidey really goes through it and goes through a very dark chapter in this film, so to have Jameson jump up on the table and be comedic is a fun way of breaking that up a little bit and, you know, not making it this unrelentingly depressing story. But the thing with Spider-Man 2 is it never really had that problem without this scene, thanks to the chocolate cake scene where Ursula Ditkovich offers Peter a slice of chocolate cake after his absolute lowest point. It may not have been comedic relief, but it was still relief nevertheless. So outside of these 2 additional scenes, what you get is extended scenes as well, many of which you wouldn't necessarily notice if it weren't pointed out to you. Stuff like just shots lingering a little longer, conversations lasting just a little bit longer, perhaps the most notable of them being Harry Osborn's talk with Peter Parker after his birthday party, where Harry goes into a lot more detail about how he wants to kill Spider-Man. I think the original version really hit the nail on the head with Harry's conversations with Peter. Here it's more like, dude, you need help. It kind of makes it a little obvious that Harry is growing a little bit more sick early on in the film. Another more notable extended conversation is Spider-Man's elevator conversation with the random guy. I'm gonna say this right now, it's a lot better and a lot more awkward in the original cut, as the stranger in the elevator is much more cartoony this time around and much more zany. It's more like a play on sort of the elevator pitch, and the guy's more like a marketing expert and he wants to give Spidey a marketing deal and he tries to give him his business card, but Spider-Man doesn't have any pockets. It all feels much more cartoonish, but I just don't think you can beat just that sort of awkward sort of there's 2 of us in an elevator, one of us is wearing a Spider-Man suit, do we talk or do we not? Try not to make eye contact, uh-oh, Peter's being awkward. So we also have extended fight sequences. And how can that be a bad thing? Spidey versus Doc Ock is one of the coolest things ever to happen to cinema. So during the Bankside fight, Spidey crashes Doc Ock into a building, pins him down and starts wailing on his face. And it raises one question: how invincible is Doc Ock's skull? Like, we gotta remember that Dr. Octavius is still a normal guy, just with these mechanical arms. If Spidey, a guy with super strength, the proportionate strength of a spider, is beaten down on his face, he should be looking like a nasty bolognese. During the train fight, Spidey at one point gets hit by a train but gets straight back up again. This kind of is like the most literal version of no matter how hard he gets hit, he always finds a way to get back up, which is very Spider-Man, but at the same time, I feel like it eliminates the stakes of the film a little bit because it almost makes Spidey feel just too invincible. And now for my absolute least favorite change in the film is during the scene at Mr. Aziz's pizza, there's much more conversation going on between Mr. Aziz and his staff, a lot more shouting and yelling at them, which shows that it's not just Peter seeing kind of the brunt of his rage. But the worst part is, for some reason, they replaced his go with a different take, where it's more like just a go sort of a thing. It's like, why? Why would you do that? Like, Mr. Aziz's delivery of that first go was hilarious. Why would you replace that? I know the new version's a bit more dignified and a little less goofy, but it's a Sam Raimi Spider-Man film. This kind of stuff is the stuff I expect. It's the stuff that makes those Spider-Man films cult classics, you know? Now, the truth be told, these changes do not really impact the film in a negative way. Like, I've been saying that I like it better without them, but they don't negatively impact it. They don't make it a worse movie, but they don't make it a better movie either. It's just an extra 8 minutes of just nothing. I'll always just prefer the standard version of Spider-Man 2. This extended cut, as far as extended cuts go, is like, it's kind of just non-existent. There's nothing here that I wouldn't feel perfectly satisfied seeing in a deleted scenes section. But then I guess the title Spider-Man 2.1 is kind of appropriate because that really is all it is. It's Spider-Man 2.1. It's not Spider-Man 2.5, not Spider-Man 2.2 even. It's just a very tiny little change to a film. But as it stands, it's a little bit more of Raimi's Spider-Man that you may or may not have discovered yet. But I'll say this right now, I think I would have been a little bit pissed had I bought this full price back in the day. And the child that I was at the time that this came out definitely would not have noticed the differences. Alright, let's mosey on over to Spider-Man 3's extended cut, released in 2017. Shortly before the release of Spider-Man's MCU debut, Spider-Man Homecoming. Now, full disclosure here, I had to watch this on a shady website. I'm sorry, right? I never advocate piracy in my videos, but they haven't released the fucking thing in Europe. There is no legal way of watching this in Europe. They don't even have it on the European Amazon streaming services. It's just fucking ridiculous. What, you think European people don't love Spider-Man? Bullshit. What's worse is you can buy the DVD box set that this comes on in Europe. It just doesn't have the editor's cut on there. Like, why? So, unlike Spider-Man 2.1, Spider-Man 3, the editor's cut, is actually shorter than its theatrical counterpart, as a number of scenes from the original have been removed. Sadly, the most egregious scenes in the film remain in there. Now, if any Spider-Man film needed a different cut, I think it was definitely Spider-Man 3. This film was not fundamentally bankrupt. It had great ideas and great intentions. It kind of felt bloated and kind of wasn't aware of when it was going too far with certain moments. And it definitely lacked the thrill factor of the previous two. Like, the action sequences, yes, they were excellent, they were thick and fast, they were big, but there's a lot less of them this time around, and they're a lot shorter. So maybe Spider-Man 3, the editor's cut, could take out some of the soapy drama stuff and make an overall more streamlined product, no? Well, no. The thing is, Spider-Man 3, the editor's cut, addresses a few very minor niggles with Spider-Man 3, however, it doesn't fix the movie, and it would probably be a little unrealistic to expect otherwise. Like Spider-Man 2.1, there's a lot of different editing choices going on, and that's kind of the bulk of what's different about this. We've got a lot of different shot choices, a lot of different musical choices, and sometimes things operate in a slightly different sequence. There are some scenes that give a little bit more dignity to the black suit and a little more screen time, but only a teensy-weensy tiny baby bit. We've got this great scene of Peter sat there contemplating as he feels tempted towards the black suit. It's very atmospheric and the black suit appears to be breathing. That's probably one of my favorite additions. After Peter and Eddie Brock's confrontation at the Daily Bugle, we see black-suited Spider-Man swinging off into the daylight. And it is legitimately really imposing, especially with the sinister music playing. And seeing the black suit in the daylight just makes me think we should have had more daylight black suit scenes, because you can barely see the fucking thing at night. There are two scenes that I really like that are cut. There's the scene where Peter apologizes to Mr. Ditkovich after his outburst at him, so the tension there isn't alleviated. And we don't have the scene where Aunt May comes to Peter's apartment to talk to him after he ditches the black suit. That scene is so full of humanity, and I really like that scene. We also have a scene where Sandman reforms and becomes a sandcastle as his only means of connecting to his daughter Penny. On one hand, it's kind of nice to see that Flint Marko is making the effort to communicate with his daughter in any way that he can, even if it means just pretending to be an inanimate object. But here's the thing with Sandman. What makes him so impressive is his special effects, but his story is about as emotionally manipulative and glib as it gets. And this scene is just more glib, poke you with a stick, you crying yet stuff. I know what you're trying to do, movie, but you're gonna have to try harder. Something that's considered quite an egregious scene, and I'm not 100% sure why, is where the butler tells Harry Osborn the truth about what happened to Norman Osborn. I would imagine that most of Norman Osborn's staff members, including the butler, would probably have been sworn to silence regarding the evil of Norman Osborn. So he would probably have to just go with it and just be like, yeah, Spider-Man killed your father, up until just the very last minute when now really counts. We know that Peter didn't tell Harry because he was sworn to secrecy, so my mind can fill in those blanks there. In this version, Harry picks up a photograph of him, Peter, and MJ all together back during their high school days. This taps into his empathy and he forgives and forgets and goes into battle to save Mary Jane, after realizing what a piece of shit human being he's been. I guess this works too, because there were a few occasions in Spider-Man 3 where Peter straight up finally admitted that he didn't kill his father. And maybe in seeing this, he's reminded of who his friends are, and it was never Norman Osborn in the first place. This kind of works for me too. Like, to be honest, these two scenes are apples and oranges, and I think that really sums up the Spider-Man 3 editor's cut as a whole. It's apples and oranges. There's a lot of stuff that I like in Spider-Man 3's editor's cut, which has been included, but there's a lot of stuff I like in the original cut that isn't present this time. And there's a lot of stuff I really don't like in both of these cuts. I'm glad the cut exists. I'm still pissed that I can't get it in Europe. Sitting down and thinking about other dimensions, other universes, do you ever wonder what your favorite film might be like in another dimension? Well, now you can have that question answered right from the comfort of your own dimension, as the Blu-ray of Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse offers an alternate universe cut. This cut begins with an introduction from the film's directors Phil Lord and Chris Miller, explaining what this cut is and that it's very much made of unfinished footage and animatics. But it has all been compiled into one narrative, so it is effectively its own movie, just with a lot of unfinished technical stuff. They both kind of boast that it is a very different experience altogether from the final film, and me being a cynical bugger, I just thought, well, it's probably going to be like Spider-Man 2.1, where it's just got a few little niggly changes. Stop overselling me, guys. Sometimes it's really good to be wrong. As the alternate universe cut is, for quite a bit of the film, a very, very different movie. The film begins by introducing us to Spider-Ham, with a little caper in his own dimension before he's sucked into a vortex. This is the last we'll see of him until he reappears in the third act. After that, the story takes a much deeper dive into the world of Miles Morales, as we see more of what his life at home is like. After he's sent off to his fancy prep school, we meet his roommate Gunk Lee. Or is it Gunker? Maybe Gank? Fuck it, I'm just gonna call him Ned. From here on, the film is much closer to the Ultimate Comics all-new Spider-Man story arc, as Ned actually plays a big role in the first act of this story. Something that's a lot of fun is after Miles gets bitten by the spider while in the presence of Ned, Ned tries to help him train to become Spider-Man and hone his powers, with a lot of comedic sequences and Ned constantly citing a Spider-Man film. Another fun spin on the character dynamic is that Ned believes that Miles is the original Spider-Man, and Miles is trying to prove that he isn't, and Ned is kind of an expert on all things Spidey. Peter B. Parker's entry to Miles' universe plays out a bit differently as well, with him lacking pants and getting arrested before escaping. He and Miles sit down at the burger restaurant, but their conversation is slightly extended, with Peter B. Parker calling his plan to get home Spider-Man Homegoing, in a fun little reference, which I'm so thrilled about, where she says, "The power of the multiverse in the palm of my hand." Do you think this may mean that we'll be seeing her again in a future Spider-Verse movie? Maybe her becoming the superior Spider-Man as the villain of the next one, like I suggested in a previous video. This is quite slow, and I don't mind that. It feels like a deliberate, slow-paced movie. It's a much more personal sort of people story, as opposed to having that core element wrapped up in all the wacky zaniness of the overall story in the theatrical cut. There's just more going on in the theatrical cut, and it still keeps the humanity of the alternate cut, but the final version is definitely just a little bit more enjoyable overall. I can say though that this situation, by having this cut available on the Blu-ray as an option, it's the best of both worlds. There's a lot there where I'm like, yeah, these scenes are really good, I wouldn't want to get rid of these. And you don't have to. You can watch it all as one long movie. This is an alternate cut that went above and beyond its Call of Duty, and really makes a world of difference, and it means, like, if you saw Into the Spider-Verse in theaters, and you loved it, but you thought, I don't necessarily need to buy it on Blu-ray, I really suggest buying it on Blu-ray just for this. And finally, Spider-Man Far From Home. The extended cut of Spider-Man Far From Home was only available for an extended period in theaters, but to my knowledge it's never made it to DVD or Blu-ray. It's Spider-Man Far From Home as we know it, but now it features a couple of minutes of Peter selling his stuff so he can afford to go on the trip and taking down a crime family as the Iron Spider. You've got this brief montage, and then you've got a brief scene of Mysterio prepping for the final battle, contacting Nick Fury and warning him of an attack in London. Overall, Spider-Man Far From Home fares up perfectly fine without these scenes, and I think the Mysterio scene is pretty dispensable, but the Spidey stuff taking down the crime family really does make quite a bit of difference. Because in that first half of the film, you don't actually see much Spider-Man. The Spidey stuff is mainly in the second half. I feel like having this scene just breaks it up just that little bit more. And it's also nice to see that Peter can't afford to go on the trip without selling his stuff. It gives us a little bit of that whole element of Peter Parker not being this wealthy kid. He's quite poor, and I think that's what a lot of people wanted to see more of going into this film. Fortunately, you can still view these scenes as a short film, which is kind of just taking place in the midway point at the beginning of the first act of the film. But I would definitely rather just have it as one complete package. Okay, so ranking them. 4th place, Spider-Man 2.1. 3rd place, Spider-Man 3 Extended Cut. 2nd place, Spider-Man Far From Home. 1st place, Into the Spider-Verse, the alternate universe cut. You really just get all of the bang for your buck with that one. What do you guys think? Comment below and discuss, and as always, if you enjoyed this video and you want to see more like it, why don't you head over to channelpup.net, where we got a blog page called Dr. Blogtopus, but as well as that, you can also buy merch, such as this awful t-shirt. But if you want to be a part of the super fun Kennel Club, why not hit subscribe, hit the like button, and in the description below, you can check out the links to my Patreon and my Twitter. I think that would be pretty sweet for both of us. What do you say, champ? But in all seriousness now, thank you so much for watching, my fellow home dogs. Have a great day, because you and I both know you